Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Hope you're having a super Friday evening. Thanks for joining me on the stream this evening. Who have we got in the chat this evening? We've got Captain Crash, good evening, sir. Hope you're having a super time over there. Brinley, thanks for joining us. Ross Lowe, hope you're not spending too much time on the stream away from work, but thanks for joining. IntelFX, good to see you again. Jet Jazz Junkie, thanks very much for joining the chat, and thanks for the follow as well over the week, much appreciated. Pilsnerish, good to see you, and Totirico, thanks very much for the stream yesterday. Awesome to see the progress on the Challenger. Can't wait to try that thing out. Texlat as well, yeah, thanks very much for joining the stream, much appreciated. Trying to fix those bugs, Captain Crash. Well, it wouldn't be software if there weren't bugs in it, eh? Thanks for joining me on the stream this evening. We're going to have a look at the TorqueSim Islander, the piston version of the Islander, just for a wee change tonight. I really like this aircraft. It's a lot of fun. It's very simple to get into and very enjoyable to fly. Recently updated as well. So a lot of the changes that were implemented on the turbine model have found their way back into the piston version. So it's almost like having a new aircraft again. The flight dynamics have been overhauled quite a bit. So we're going to fly it around the Caribbean, the Antilles. We're going to fly from Princess Juliana down to St. Bart's, and then back to Princess Juliana, and then down to Saba and back again. I've actually bought some pairware scenery for the first time in a long time, not for Juliana itself, but this is the gateway scenery still. But over at St. Bart's, because of the terrain over there, the default scenery just doesn't really work that well there. You get a feel for it, but it's not quite the same. And Saba, especially with the runway being very close to the cliffs, the pairway scenery does a better job of it. At IntelFX, this is the piston version of the Islander. You can tell the difference from a distance. You don't have the wing fences on the top. The wings are a little bit shorter. It's fairly straightforward. There's not much difference really, apart from obviously the engine startup. So let's jump inside and see if I can remember how to start this up. It's been a busy week in the sim, I have to say. I've been spending a lot of time testing some other stuff, so this is hopefully going to be a straightforward trip down to St. Bart's and back again. Yeah, performance, Totirico, the piston, it tends to have a little bit more initial power off the line, if you like, but the turbine climbs a lot better once it actually gets going. But the piston's ideal for this kind of job. So at the moment the fuel selectors are switched off. With any kind of aircraft, it's simple to work from top to bottom and left to right. So the fuel selectors, I'm going to put them cross tank, so the left engine feeds off the right tank and the right engine feeds off the left tank. And we'll just do that as we start up. I'll check the rest of the switches and levers up here. Cabin air, I obviously want that on. Don't need any heat in the Caribbean, it's about 30 degrees outside. Mags are selected off, fuel pumps are selected off. Down here, all the switches are off. It's got this odd external supply switch. If you haven't flown the Islander, this is really a starter isolate switch. I don't know why it's labelled external supply, but that's true to the real thing. You know, it's British, it's a little bit weird, that's how they are. The trim indicators here, I'll just adjust the trim to make sure it's in the neutral position. Check all the breakers are in, because they are modelled on this aircraft. How many hours I've flown this one? That's not too bad. Parking brake is on, and we've got the carb heat levers down here as well. I've got key bindings for those because, you know, they're a little bit awkward to get at down there. On the menu here, we've got kilograms. It's using the load manager here. All the seats are full. Glass reflections it's got. On the piston aircraft, there used to be some nice instrument vibrations. And on the 1.2 release, because it's borrowing heavily from the turbine version, those have kind of got forgotten about. But I believe that's being addressed, and the next release should put those vibrations back in again. So if you're flying the 1.2 release and you're missing those vibrations, it's not just you. The developers want to put them back as well. Yeah, we should have put the pilot seat backwards or maybe sideways, just for a little bit of fun. You know, it's got to be awkward. This is one of the most successful British aircraft ever, one of the most successful commercial exports in service all around the world, simply because it's unique and it's, you know, it's an honest and fun little aircraft. So all the switches are off at the moment. We'll put the battery on. So lift the gang bar, put the battery on. And have I got the display set to dim? Yes, I have. There we go. So all the lights are there. To start it up, it's really straightforward. I'm going to put the cabin lights and the passenger notices on in the back, just in case MD wants the reading lights for whatever reason. We'll put the beacon light on, and I'll switch the external supply switch on. That's the starter isolate, as I said. We'll bring both of the mixture levers up. I'll open the throttle just a little bit. There's no primer, there's no dedicated primer on the Islander. You would prime it by wobbling the throttle. But for the most part, this is the default laminar engine modelling. So it's not overly sophisticated in that respect, but it really makes up for it when you have fun flying it. Shomo Boy, thanks very much for joining the stream. And YD Simulations, thanks for joining the chat. We can have a chat about the Integra once we get airborne, if you like. Really looking forward to it, though. It's nice to have a bit of variety in your sims. So the mixture is full forward, and what we're going to do is start the right engine and then the left engine. So just double check that the right hand propeller is clear. I'm going to switch the right hand fuel pump on and the number 1 mag on. We're only going to start on 1 mag on the Islander. The prop's clear, switches are set, crank, and we get 1000 RPM and the oil pressure comes up. I'll put the second mag on and I'll switch the fuel pump off. I'll just take a sec to check the volume level there. I think I'll bring the aircraft sounds down just a little bit. Hope it's not too loud for you. So that's a good start on the number 2 engine. We'll start the number 1 engine up, just check it's clear here. Fuel pump on, number 1 mag on. Still clear, crank, check for 1000 RPM, check for the oil pressure, second mag comes on, fuel pump goes off. Now having done that, we've got to obviously check that we've got control of the mags as well. So all I'm going to do is cycle each mag off momentarily, make sure there's a slight drop on the RPM, and then back on again. And we do that with each of the mags, make sure that we can ground each of the mags. Having done that, we've got control of all 4 of the mags. We need to put the electrics on. At the moment it's just running on the battery. If I put the battery switch here, you can see that we're draining about 10 amps. So if I put the left hand generator on, you see the voltage comes up. So it's not just the battery voltage, it's the alternator voltage we've got now, the generator voltage, and the current on the battery is 0. Back to left gen, it's charging at 10 amps, that's what we expect. If I bring the right gen on, that comes down to 5 amps. Check the right gen's also providing the voltage, and then back. Having done that, we checked out the electric systems. I'll switch that supply isolator off there, put the avionics on, and we'll put the vent motor on. And that is pretty much the Islander started up. YD Simulations, this one is carburetor. It's got a little, the default engine modelling doesn't do carburetor engines very well, so you've got to be careful with the fuel pumps on any carburetor aircraft in X-Plane. You can flood them in a slightly unrealistic manner, so always be careful of those fuel pumps. Only have them on without the engine running, only run the fuel pump for a reasonably short period of time. Having started it in the cross tank configuration, where the left engine's feeding off the right tank and vice versa, we'll switch them both back onto engine to tank now, and this is the normal config for the aircraft. Excellent. So it's got a slaving gyro as well. You see the gyro can be set to free mode, and we steer it around here. But if we switch it back onto slaving, you'll see that it'll always align itself to the magnetic indications. All we do is we double check it left and right to make sure that it's returning to the slave position, and the course is what, 185 degrees. We'll come across to this side and we'll make sure this one's set, because you've got to keep the right hand side aligned. And I think, having done that, we've pretty much done everything we need to do. We've got the vent motor on to blow some fresh air in for the customers. The flaps are up. So ready to taxi off. We'll put the transponder to alt. It's on 2000, which I believe is a Caribbean oddity for these aircraft. We're going to fly VFR, but 2000 for our conspicuity. We don't have any taxi lights, there's nothing else down there, so we'll just check that we're clear to the left, clear to the right, and we're going to taxi out. We're basically going to head down here, do the power checks, and then we'll launch off towards St. Bart's. So power to idle, brakes off, and away we go. So typically when these aircraft are used in commercial service, the power checks, the run-ups would be done as part of the morning checks on the aircraft. So that would be done when the aircraft is brought into service. You wouldn't tend to do the power checks with the passengers on board, and you only really need to do power checks once a day if the aircraft's operating continuously. After that, it's simply a case of checking the mags out each time you start it. So each of our stops today we'll do a full shutdown, and then we'll do the quick startup, if you like, on the next attempt. I hope that makes sense. As I said, I've been spending a lot of time in the sim. I've been in X-Plane for about 11 hours today, so this stream's going to be a little bit shorter than perhaps some of the other ones. And if I start to doze off or yawn, I do apologise. Did everybody catch Totorico's stream yesterday, looking at the Challenger? It's fantastic to see how much progress has been made on the aircraft now. Yeah, I've slightly overextended myself, to be honest, Captain Crash. Just ever so slightly, but it's enjoyable. Intel FX, it ended with a nice landing at Thessaloniki. Finishing line slowly coming into view. That's great to hear. Right, we could do a quick flight control check as we're taxiing out here, so just wiggle the controls. If I bring the control column on here, you can see how much movement we've got on the Islander. There's a lot of movement on those controls to be aware of. Yeah, I think it's probably the most hotly anticipated aircraft in Sims for quite a long time, the Challenger. Right, we'll just point it ever so slightly into the wind. There's nil wind in my sim, but I'll point it roughly towards the runway in use, and we shall set the parking brake and make sure it's holding. So just to double check the run-up config, I'm going to do the run-up with the fuel pumps off because I want to make sure the engine pump can do everything it's supposed to do without the assistance of the boost pump. Yeah, Totorico, I genuinely believe it. I think people are really looking forward to the Challenger because it's going to deliver a level of simulation that I think people have been waiting for. So run up in the Islander is really straightforward. We've got to check the mags and we have to check the props as well. The mags are done at 2100 RPM and the props are done at 1500. So I'll just bring the power slowly up, and notice as I'm increasing the throttle, it's increasing the RPM. So it's a variable pitch, constant speed propeller. But until the propeller gets onto the stops, you are still controlling it with the throttle. So there's 2100 RPM. Up here, I'll check the mags. So left mag number 1 goes off, I get a slight drop. Number 2 goes off, slight drop, and it's the same drop as number 1, that's good. Looking at the number 2 engine, similarly, a small drop, it recovers, small drop, it recovers as well. We'll check the carb heat, remember that's the lever down here, I'll use them both together, and back to normal. If you're using this, don't worry too much about the carb heat dial here, that's been an X-Plane thing for as long as I can remember. It doesn't quite behave correctly in the default simulation. Once we're at 2100 RPM, check the gyro suction is there as well. Right, we'll come back to 1500. And then we'll start doing the propeller feather checks as well. So what we're trying to do here is, if I go into the outside view momentarily, the propellers are controlled by oil pressure. The pitch on the propeller blades controlled by oil pressure, and there's a reservoir of oil in the spinner here. When the aircraft's left, that oil will get a little bit colder. It's not warm oil. It does warm up gradually because there's little holes that allow the oil to circulate through. But we have to go through the feathering process to make sure the propellers feather smoothly. So we'll do it 3 times on the first flight. I'll do them each individually. So make sure we get a good drop. I'll do the second engine while the first one's recovering. Do it again. And on a real aircraft, especially in the UK when it's been left overnight and it's all cold and heavy oil, the first feather check, it'll be really, really rough. You'll put the lever back and it'll just sit there looking at you, and then after a few seconds it'll get the idea and then it'll feather. Obviously that's not what you want if you actually really do need to feather the prop when you get airborne. So this is what we do. We cycle the propellers a few times to make sure that you're getting fresh, warm fluid oil coming through the propeller there. So that's us cycled the propeller, cycled the governor. We'll do one final check here, make sure it works all the way back at idle. Then we'll come back to 1000 and we'll set the aircraft up for the flight. So we've done the flight controls. We've given everybody the brief, the doors are closed. So we'll put the pitot heat on, I'll put the landing lights on, I'll not worry about the nav lights because it's daylight. We'll set the flaps and I'll put the fuel pumps on. And just checking across the top here, the mags are switched on, flaps are set to take off, fuel pumps are on, fuel level is checked, fuel selection is checked, electrics are checked here. The switches set appropriately for the departure, and the levers, we've got full forward on the propeller and full rich on the mixture. We've done the flight control check. Eventualities, well, we're going to basically fly ahead. Take off runway 10, we'll make a right hand turn out, climbing up to approximately 1500 feet, head down towards St. Bart's. Have I done my ETOPS planning, Captain Crash? Yeah, it's difficult on one engine. Islander's a tricky aircraft, single engine. The turbine's a bit better. Hey Vinny, didn't see you in the chat there, thanks very much for joining, much appreciated. Le Capitano, I honestly can't remember. I think my settings are fairly basic. Tell you what, let's when we set the brake, we'll have a look. I shall show you that this is not the world's fastest computer. So it's got 6 gigs of GPU, RAM, and well, there you go. It's not fantastic, to be honest. The scenery in this area, though, is very light. It's running, what, 70 frames a second at the moment, which is quite remarkable for my sim. The Islander is very, very light on the frames. It runs really well. Right, let's line up. So I'm not going to backtrack. I don't need all the runway in the Islander. I mean, we're going to Saba later, which is, what, 350, 400 meters? So it'd be silly to use all of this big long runway with the Islander. .4 kilohertz, yeah, thanks very much for joining the chat. The updated piston Islander. Right, let's just go. So smoothly up to full power. Check the RPM, goes up to the full 2700. Manifold pressure's coming up, it's where we expect it to be. Airspeed's alive. Checked on the other side. 50 knots, 55, 60, just ease it into the climb. It's a long runway, I'm just going to hold the pitch attitude there, let her accelerate a little bit. I don't need to force it into a high angle climb. 500 feet a minute's enough. 70 to 75 knots, that's good enough to bring the flaps up. So raise the flaps and I'll just lift the nose ever so slightly to offset the lack of lift or the loss of lift as the flaps come up. Adjust the trim and we're going to make a right hand turn out. We'll just climb through that gap in the hills here. So on a really breezy day with any aircraft of limited performance, any sort of piston aircraft in general, you want to be careful flying in the lee of the hills because you can very easily get in a situation that you can't outclimb the descending air. But not an issue today, it's nil wind. Above 500 feet, she's climbing nicely, it's accelerating well, so I'll just bring the props back ever so slightly. Props come back to 2500, that reduces the noise. And just adjust the trim now. And we'll climb about 95 knots. I'm only going up to 1500 feet, so should be straightforward. Hey the Matium, thanks very much for joining the chat. Good to see you again. All the temps and pressures are looking reasonable. The oil temps, a touch on the high side, but that's to be expected. CHTs are good, that's the most important thing. And there's St. Bart's all the way over there. It'll take us a few minutes to get there. What I really enjoy about the Islander, as I said, is it's a very easy aircraft to get into. It's very simple to begin with. You can have a lot of fun with it, and it's very capable. It's got a nice autopilot that does most things correctly. It's got the GNS 530 if you want to do IFR procedures, and it's just generally a joy to fly. It's a very friendly aircraft. So level at 1500 feet, I'll just bring the manifold pressure back a little bit with the throttle, and then I'll bring the RPM back to about 2300. So maybe 23 and 25, 2300 RPM, 25 inches on the manifold, and I'll just adjust any pressure that I'm holding. There we go. And for the cruise, I'll turn off the fuel pump. So there's the number 1 pump goes off, it comes back into the green band there. Number 2 pump comes off, and it's the same. And I can switch off the vent motor as well. When we're flying, the airflow itself, you can see the air intakes for the vents at the back of the base of the tail fin there. We don't really need the motor when we've got airflow on the aircraft. Exactly, Texlat, it's not a pleasant situation to be in. I've been on the lee side of a mountain in a rather underpowered and fairly close to maximum weight Cessna 172, the old H model 172s, and you know, when you're at best angle of climb or best rate of climb, full power, and the VSI still pointing down, it's not a pleasant situation to be in. But you know, you just work it out. So I found some procedures online for the flight from from Princess Juliana over towards St. Bart's. If we have a look in Avatab here, we're going to fly across to, well, it's some French pronunciation, I'm guessing. Is this Forcheux? I guess this is this rock ahead of us here. Another rock called Sugarloaf, and then we're going to make the approach onto runway 10. We're going to do this all at 1500 feet, so it's only the initial descent from Sugarloaf. So a single descent from Sugarloaf all the way down towards the runway. The scenery I've got is the Airworthiness or Airworthy Designs Princess of the Caribbean Part 2. I only bought it yesterday really for something to fly with, because I've been fairly, not disappointed, that's the wrong word. The terrain, the relationship between the terrain and the runway in the stock mesh isn't ideal. So the pairware scenery sorts that out. It did add another interesting fact as well, and that is the way the tailplane goes into ground effect in X-Plane. It seems like it's a little bit overdone. You know, when you're in a big airliner and you're descending towards the runway, you do get into, you know, the tailplane starts to lose effectiveness as it flies into the downwash of the main wing. So you have to kind of hold the nose up a little bit more. And as you sink down into that area, that's fine. It's a gradual increase in back pressure required. But when we're flying out in the Caribbean here, we're flying over a cliff. You'll see it going into Saba. We fly over a cliff and straight into that ground effect. And in X-Plane, it's like turning a switch on. You basically, or turning a switch off would be perhaps more apt. You end up running out of elevator authority instantly. You're pitching and then you're not pitching, so it gets quite exciting. And the thing about Saba is it happens right at the point you want to flare as well. So that's my excuses for the landings over and done with already. But it's a great looking little model, the Islander. I have a lot of fun just pulling it around. I find it quite relaxing most days. So this is Forcheux. Is it Forcheux? Probably. And Sugarloaf should be down to the right here. I've never been in one for real, 3.4 kilohertz. I'm very sorely tempted to go and do some flying in an Islander. I'm just watching the finances at the moment because of the global situation, but I'd love to do some Islander flying. Did you enjoy it? Was it noisy? So that should be Sugarloaf down here. Yeah, I would imagine it's very compact in the back. Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot of space back there. Cool, so Sugarloaf here, we're going to fly around the south side of Sugarloaf and then come and make the approach onto the runway. Just basically north of this island here and straight in. So approaching the airfield, I'll put the fuel pumps back on again. I'll put the vent motor on for when we got on the ground. It doesn't make any real difference up here. Check the switches, I've got the lights on, we've got the fuel pumps on, and the fuel tanks and levels are good. We'll see how this works out. I'll start slowing down. So I'll bring the manifold pressure back to about just below 20 initially. And remember, they're wanting the whole procedure from 1500 feet. So Sugarloaf, 1500, and then we'll start the descent. That's the great thing about it, Patronisa. It's hands-on flying. You know, I'll use the autopilot for a few minutes on the way down towards Saba, but otherwise it's all hands-on. So there's Sugarloaf coming up. We're just at the speed limit for the first stage of flaps, so let's take the flaps to takeoff position. There's the airfield down there, you can just about see it. I'll make the carpet hot, bring the power off. We'll start the descent. So about 80 knots is good for this initial part of the descent. Can you see the runway yet? So notice as I brought the power off, the RPMs dropped off. So I can now push the levers full forward without having the RPMs surge. Let's set the next stage of flaps. So flaps to landing. Adjust the trim. I'm looking to come back to the blue line speed. Blue line is the best rate of climb single engine, but it's a good reference speed in the Islander to do pretty much everything at. Put the carpet cold, so that's 3 levers up at the bottom, 4 levers forward, and fuel pumps on, flaps to landing. There's a runway down there somewhere. Now let's see how this goes. I've been practicing a little bit, but this is always a bit hit or miss, shall we say. It's quite difficult to get the visual cues right in the sim. What I found helps is not to scrape over the hill at very low level, just to keep us out of that ground effect weirdness for a little bit longer. And always remember to look at the far end of the runway as well. There's some people taking their selfies there. Looking at the far end now. There we go. Squeeze the brakes. There we go. I'll come all the way to a halt. And we'll turn it around. Let's have a look at that on the replay, see how it goes. I do love the look of the landing into St. Bart's, because just the shadow as you come over the hill, that's that iconic view. So I've done this a few times, been really low over there, and just as you pop over the hill you get that tailplane into ground effect, and it's not pleasant. As long as you're down by that taxiway there, all is well. I'm sure everybody's seen the video, or I think it's a Piper twin, it might be an Aztec, I'm not 100% sure, where they go off to the beach at the far end. Jet Jazz Junkie, it's the Airworthiness Designs AWD Princess of the Caribbean. I'll bring the flaps up. I think the runway's wide enough to turn on, so let's do that. And the click you're hearing is simply because I've got a button for my hold brakes regular. Was it a Baron? It might be a Baron actually, yeah, it was a bit heavier looking than an Aztec. Right, back up the hill we go. I can switch off the pitot heater I'll switch off the fuel pump. So you know what, it's daylight as well, so I'll switch off the landing lights and I'll just readjust that trim as well. Right, let's see if we can find somewhere to park. There we go, that's fairly uneventful for the first trip. It's one of the great things about the Islander is you can get a lot of flights in a short amount of time, so if you've only got half an hour spare for simming the Islander, you can do 1 or 2 flights in it. You don't have any FMSs to worry about, you don't have any IRs to align. It's all entirely straightforward. We'll not take Charlie. All of the parking spots seem to be signed for parking facing the other way. My sleep pattern's been quite disrupted, Vinny. It's always a little bit disrupted. I'm trying to get it back onto a normal sleep pattern, but the result is that I'm a bit more tired than I should be at this time of the day. They stopped developing sceneries, Patronisa. I didn't know that. I'll use a bit more power. We might actually get up the hill here. I've not been at work in such a long time, Captain Crash. Fundamentally, my body clock is normally broken. I either get up at 3 o'clock in the morning or go to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. There's no happy medium. And not going into work, not having to get up for the school run, all these sort of things. It just, it takes its toll. Right, where are we going to park? Not beside the PC-12 there. We'll take it down, maybe parking 3. There we go. I should really get my pedals sorted out. I think I just need to open them up and spray them with something. Anyway, parking brake's set. Now that we're here, simply do a quick check on the mags as well. So we check the mags after startup and after shutdown. Each time we're just looking for a slight drop to make sure that we're grounding each of the mags. Having done that, check the fuel pumps are off. I'll put the cabin vent off, put the avionics switch off, and throttle, mixture, fuel, we'll leave there. The fuel pumps are set off. Mags can go off. And we'll switch off the lights, the beacon, and the electrics. So throttle, mixture, fuel, mags, master. Let's open the doors. One of the things I think X-Plane is really needing, and I hope they implement it in X-Plane 12, is a walk mode. So many add-ons have got lovely interactive features on the outside now, and having to use the view keys to kind of slew around is it's getting a bit old. You know, times have moved on. So having a nice walk mode, I think, is going to be a good thing if they choose to do that. Where's that hotspot? It's in here somewhere. We can open the door. There we go. So that's the thing, because the Islander is so small, there's separate doors for each set of seats. This is me talking about view modes, and then it slows around very quickly. Here we go. Can you hear the exhaust cooling? Let me just make sure the volume. I'll turn it up for a second. It's very immersive. Cool. So yeah, I quite enjoy the scenery. It's what you get in the default scenery is some trees here, but the roads are very flat. So this is the iconic approach into St. Bart's here with this guy here who's obviously very happy. He's obviously dressed for different weather than this guy was dressed for, but you know, that's understandable. He's got a twin over here. He's also very excited. But it just kind of works for this scenery, for this kind of airport. So I quite like it. I've been quite satisfied with the purchase. It fits into hillside nicely, and you don't have that same kind of terrain clipping that you get with the default stuff. There's this barren there, Captain Crash. All fixed. the LZ-129 will get a walk-through system to Impractical. Yeah, it would take forever. It would take forever to slow through it, wouldn't it, Captain Crash? Absolutely. How are we doing for the time? That was a fairly quick flight over, wasn't it? So let's go back to Princess Juliana. One of the great things about an Islander compared to an Airbus is you've only got 8 or 9 passengers, and they've all got their own doors, so disembarkation is going to take like 2 minutes and another 3 minutes to get everybody back on, maybe a minute or so to brief them, not the half hour it takes on the Airbus. So let's get these doors closed, see if I can do it internally for a change. Nothing in the baggage hold. Can we close this internally? There we go. These guys got a door here. There we go. There's another door here. And then I've got my own door. So before you get in the aircraft, before you close the doors, you make sure that all the other doors are closed as well. 4 minutes to get front to back in the Hindenburg. Has everybody caught up with Captain Crash's streams on the Hindenburg as well? Look at the detail he's put into that. Check the battery needle when using the starter. Yeah, it does. It'll go off the scale. I think Totarico might know. It's been a long time since I looked at piston engine stuff, but I'm fairly sure the ammeter shunt. Basically the ammeter is a voltmeter. There's no such thing really as an ammeter. An ammeter is a voltmeter with a shunt, as I understand it. I'm not an electrician. I'm not an electronics engineer. But the starter cable tends to bypass the shunt because there's a current limit on the ammeter. You can't put too much current through the shunt, otherwise it'll pop like any other piece of electronics. The starter is the highest drain thing you've got, so the starter cable will bypass the shunt, so it shouldn't show the starter load on the needle there. Right, we'll do the abbreviated startup this time because we've already started it once. We know the aircraft is good. I'll put the battery switch on. We'll put the cabin lights, the passenger notices and the beacon on. We'll put on the external supply. We'll bring the mixture up. And on the overhead, we've got the fuel on. We don't need to do the cross tank check. So fuel pump on, left, number 1 mag on the right engine. It's clear. Start. It fires. We've got 1000 RPM and oil pressure's good. We'll put the number 2 mag on and the fuel pump off. I want to call these left and right mags because that's what I'm used to on a single engine piston. On this they call them the number 1 and the number 2 mags to avoid left-right confusion between the engines. And this is, I would call this the number 1 engine and the number 2 engine. So this is weird. Right, this is not how I would have labelled it, but hey ho. Fuel pump on, number 1 mag on, props clear, crank. We've got 1000 RPM, oil pressure's up, second mag comes on, fuel pump goes off, and then it's down to the electrics. Put the generator on, battery current goes to 0, voltage comes up, we'll put the other one on. Remains the same. Quick check, left, check right, still good. And then back to both. Avionics on, supply switch off, and the vent motor comes on. I haven't, have I reported it, Pilsners? I don't think I've reported it. I've been busy doing lots of other stuff as well. Rust85C, sorry, I didn't see you join the chat there. It's a lovely aircraft, the 340. It's a lot of fun. I've not tried 1.63 yet. I'm still on 1.61. But yeah, it's super. And Aviator himself, thanks for joining the chat. Much appreciated. Right, we've got what have I done? I've got the generators on, we've got the vent motor on. Yes, the mags. So we always have to check the mags to make sure that we've got control of them. We don't need to do a full run-up. Simply cycle all the mags and make sure I get a slight drop on each. Whilst we're sitting here on the ramp, we can also do a single feather check now on each of the propellers. I always want to make sure that the propellers will feather, because if I'm if I end up in a single engine case and I can't feather the prop, then I'm not going to be able to climb. It's as simple as that. Do the flight control check while we're sitting here, just get everything done and out the way, so that when we taxi off, we are good to go. Trim is set. I'll set the flaps as well. And now we've had the fuel pumps off, we've run for a little bit of time with the fuel pumps off, we've checked the pressure, I'll put those fuel pumps back on. All we need to do when we line up is the pitot heat and the landing lights. So, we're going to go out, we'll use full length, we'll take off runway 10, and we'll go back to Princess Juliana. My Caribbean geography is simply awful. So, I know these 3 airports. Self-brief, Captain Crash, doing it Caribbean style. That was a self-brief. In the event of an engine failure, I shall do something. Actually, with the turbine Islander, I've tried single engine in both of the versions of the Islander. Since the piston version was updated, it's manageable single engine. It's still very marginal, but it's manageable. The turbine is very easy, single engine. The key with the Islander is airspeed. If you don't have airspeed, it's really hard work. So that blue line speed, yeah, it's if you're faster than that, it's easier. More airspeed you've got, the better. I do need to spend some time in the Caribbean, Vinny, absolutely. I was looking at that later, it's like, where should I take my Islander now? Right, we'll line up on runway 10 via Alpha. There's nobody coming in over the hill, so I'll put the pitot on, the lights on. We've checked everything else. We've got 3 levers up at the bottom, so that's the park and brake, the car P off, 4 levers forward. T's and P's are good. So not the world's longest runway. Does everybody remember the video from a few years ago where Frugal took off in the majestic Q400 from here? That was pretty tight. Not an issue with the Islander. Right, full power. We've got full RPM, manifold pressure's increasing, T's and P's are good otherwise, airspeed's alive, it's cross-checked. 40, 50, 55, 60, rotate. Just gently into the climb. Again, not really any terrain to climb over, so I'll let the aircraft accelerate. We'll start that turn. Above 70 knots and climbing, flaps go up, and I'll just increase the pitch attitude to offset the loss of lift from the flaps, looking out for the boats. And we'll climb away. Conquistador, yeah, I believe it looks really nice. I've not done a lot of flying in the Caribbean and X-Plane, but I really want to do some more. Right, there's 500 feet. It's climbing nicely. I'll just bring the props back ever so slightly. Comes back to 2500. Just keeps the noise down. And I'll just adjust the pitch attitude to maintain about 90 knots. So this is Frégate up here, I believe, and then we're going to turn left across back towards Princess Juliana. I would have liked to have seen this boat modelled in the scenery. When you've got an ortho boat like that, I think you should model it as well. Right, for the trip back, we're only going up to 1,000 feet. So that'll do is level off. I'll bring the manifold pressure back a little bit. Bring the RPM back to 23, reset 23 on the manifold. And from here it's just a case of flying back across to Fort Chew, I think it is, and then on towards Princess Juliana. Yeah, do something with it, Totoyuko, one thing or the other. It doesn't matter. Remove it or model it. Either way is good. Right, level at 1,000 feet, we'll have the fuel pumps off momentarily, check the pressure remains in the green, switch the vent motor off, and away we go. Dracomase, good evening, thanks for joining the chat, hope you're having a super evening. go. We are 45 minutes into the stream and we're halfway through our second sector. That's not too bad. So that's Saba over there. I think, is it Nevis and St. Kitts is the next one across? There's one before Nevis and St. Kitts. I don't know what that is. My geography is rubbish outside of Europe. I can kind of find my way across Europe by looking at VORs, but once I get outside of it. So that might be Nevis and St. Kitts over there. And I think there's Barbuda and Antigua as well. I really don't know. Highest point in the Netherlands. Never thought about it that way, Vinny. Makes sense. Have you seen on the chart as well? Let me find the other map. This one here. So what you've got is Juliana terminal area here. This little wedge of airspace here, that's the French airspace, because obviously St. Barth's and this part of St. Martin is French. So this is French air traffic control, having an exclusive area, and then you've got St. Martin or Juliana centre there, just to make it extra interesting. Is that a boat or a rock? Don't know. So we've got the VOR tuned as well. And we're just basically flying on the 305 radial in and out. And what we're going to do is join on the 45 downwind right hand for runway, I want to say 10, I think it's 10. It's certainly sunnier than flying the Islander in Scotland. It always feels a bit fake when I put these lovely blue skies on and then fly around in Scotland. Wish there was some rain showers at least. Is it hovering? It might be. So they do two scenery packages, Rossello. There's the St. Barth's and Saba, which is what I've got. And they've got another scenery pack for St. Martin, and you can just about see the border, I think, between them. Rust 85, I've not heard anything about it recently. I know it's still very much an active development proposition. They're working really hard on it, but I've not seen any recent news for it. It'd be nice to have a good Dash 8 in the sim though, huh? Turboprops are excellent. I get quite excited about any new aircraft, to be honest. I'm quite looking forward to seeing the Integra launch for the SR22 and the SR20. Not specifically because I've got anything, not specifically because I really want to see an Integra, but because I really want to see a general aviation aircraft that's implemented with something other than the G1000. I kind of feel that if more developers were to take a step into the unknown a little bit and do something slightly different, then that might also help persuade Laminar to improve the quality of the G1000 a little bit. There's just a few things on it that get frustrating. And it's alright when you've got alternatives, you know, when you can say, this is annoying me, I'm getting a bit irritated with it, I'm going to go fly something else. But when every other thing you fly also has the same issue because it's using the same avionics, that's not quite as good. Next Friday for the Integra. I saw that, Bernish. I'm not on the FlyJSim Discord. I really only check on the Hotstar and the TorqueSim Discords regularly. Usually it gets posted in the Hotstar Discord when there's something nice. Yeah, I was looking at my logbook earlier, Conquistador del Rey. I've got 145 hours in behind the G1000, of which 140 hours are VFR and 5 hours at IFR. It's an alright system in real life, it's nice. Its user interface is fairly dated. The soft key stuff doesn't really... I don't think it's ideal. You tend to spend a lot of time heads down with it, and it's not great for IFR. But it's way better than having knackered old instruments that don't stay upright. You know, that's the big thing, is the G1000. It will work, it works reliably, and it's fairly easy for avionics shops to keep it working as well. Right, approaching the field, we'll put the fuel pumps on, one pump, other pump, we'll have the vent motor on, quick squeeze of the brakes to make sure we get brake pressure, all is good. Oh yeah, I'm on the Fearless Discord, I forgot about that. I have to mute the Fearless Discord because you tend to get pings from it every 3 seconds though. So I check in there once or twice a week as opposed to 3 or 4 times an hour on the Hot Start Discord. So I'm going to join downwind right hand. Is the runway down here? And on a long runway like this, we don't necessarily need to land with full flaps on the Islander, but given that the next landing is going to be into Saba, let's get the hang of flying it with full flaps. So I'll come back on the power. And just to pick up on what I said on the way into St. Bart's about the propeller RPM, a lot of checklists will tell you to put the propeller full forward at this point as part of the checks. If I do that, all it does is bring the noise up, right? Let me put it back. If I wait until the propeller essentially fines out all by itself, until it reaches the fine stop limit, and then push the levers forward, you don't get that surge, and it's just a lot more friendly to the people in the aircraft and people on the ground. Downwind, I put the carb heat on. It's probably not really a thing in the Caribbean, although it's fairly humid, I suppose. Jet Jazz Junkie, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure somebody in the chat will be able to sort an invite for you. Right, we'll turn in. There's the first stage of flaps. There we go. And see, as I bring the power off, concentrate on the flying for a second. As I bring the power off, you see the RPM starting to reduce, so now I can push the levers full forward without any significant increase on the RPM. Inside the white arc, we'll take the second stage, and the carb heat cold. Oh, have I overshot this? Oh, there we go. So those 4 whites, we're not going to worry about that in an Islander. That's normal in an Islander. I've got 3 levers up, 4 levers forward. We've got the fuel pumps on, flaps to landing, and fuel sufficient. So we'll not try and scrape over the beach to show off to the spectators. It's a good way to have a visit with your chief pilot. So always looking at the far end of the runway, and remember in the Islander when you bring the power back you lose a lot of lift as well, so it's basically a 2-stage thing. You arrest the rate of descent and then smoothly bring the power off, and then down you go. Excellent, let's try and find the point I entered the runway. I think it was here, is it Charlie? So we'll take it down to the next one. There we go. Squeeze the brakes. And off we go. Right, flaps coming up. Wait to see Saba, that will not be a nice landing. Landing lights go off, pitot heat comes off, fuel pump's coming off, and we've got the vent motor still running. Let's go this way. Oh, thanks Vinny, have a great evening, have a super weekend, and see you later. Thanks for joining the stream. So on the taxi in, we can save ourselves a little bit of time, make sure we're not going to run into anything, and just cycle the mags as we do. Drop no stop on each of the mags. All is good. Where did I park? I'm guessing anywhere around here is probably good enough. Let's go here so we don't have a long taxi. Come on, vehicles. Out the way, thank you. Seth Pilot, thanks for the follow. Much appreciated. Hey, Jono, good to see you. It's going okay. Not too bad. I think from memory, Rusty, I think it's $35. It's been a while. There's a package price for both of them. If you get the turbine and the piston, it might be about $50 if you get both. I can't honestly remember. Right, the parking brake is set. Reset 1000. We've checked the mags. All of that's done. I'll switch the vent motor off, and avionics can go off. Throttle, mixture, fuel, mags, and beacon, switches, master. Does everybody know about the mag switch on the Islander? The mags here, obviously the engine is very close to the doors here. If I open the door and the left mags are switched on, that's a stall warning horn. That's how it tells you that the mags are left on. And actually, there's a latch. Now, this isn't simulated in the model because it's not really of any practical benefit. But this is almost like a solenoid latch here, that when the mags are selected on, this latch is held in place so you can't open the door. It's obviously got a lever, so in the event of an emergency, you pull the lever and you can get out anyway. But it basically locks the door when the mags are switched on, so you can't inadvertently open the door into the prop or start the prop. You shouldn't be able to get the aircraft into position where you can start the engine with the door open. So it's one of the checks you do with the Islander. One of the things I really like about the Islander pack, or having the turbine and the piston aircraft, is they're very, very similar to fly. Once you've learned the procedures for the piston aircraft, flying the turbine aircraft is very similar. The startup's a bit different, the power lever handling's a bit different, but it works at the same speeds. There's nothing really significantly different about the systems on board, except it's got tip tanks for the fuel. So it's really a very accessible little turbine aircraft, and you can go lots of fun places with it. So Saba is like one of the shortest commercial runways. In fact, I think Saba's actually closed officially. It's got the X's painted on the end of the runway, so operations into Saba are done with some sort of dispensation, which is interesting in itself. Now, it's a bit short for the Islander with nil wind. I'm flying with nil wind today, simply because of those elevator effects I was talking about earlier. With 10 or 15 knots down the runway, it's plenty long enough. We've still got 40 gallons of fuel in each tank. It uses about 15 gallons an hour, so we've comfortably got 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's fine for going down to Saba and back again. Well, let's just close it up. We'll get underway. So again, quick startup. Across the top here, mags are selected off, fuel selected, tanks to engines, the pumps are off. All of the switches, I'll bring on the electrics, the battery only, cabin lights, passenger notices, beacon on, external supply on. And we're ready to start. We'll do the right engine first, as before. So, pump on, right number 1 mag on, check we are clear, start. Come on. Oh, my bad. Throttle, mixture, that'll do it. Here we go. If it doesn't start first time, you've probably done something wrong. There's 1000 RPM, we've got oil pressure in, and the mags go on. Pump comes off. We'll check the other side. It is clear. Pump on. Mags on. And start. 1000 RPM, oil pressure, second mag, pumps off, check the mags, 1, 2, 1, 2. Gyro compass is fair enough, it's pointing in the right direction. We've got 10 amp drain, I'll switch on one of the generators. It charges, the voltage comes up, I'll switch on the other generator. No difference. Check the left gen, 5 amps, right gen, 5 amps. We are good. External supply, the start isolator off, avionics on, and we'll just wait for it to align. Loganair, they used to have 5 Islanders. They've operated Islanders throughout their existence. Just check the props as well. They've operated Islanders throughout their existence. They used to use them out of Glasgow for air ambulance work, but that was taken over by the King Airs. So they still operate out of the Orkneys. The Shetland aircraft were previously Loganair. They're now operated by the council directly. And both the Shetland and Orkney operations were public service obligation, so they were basically government subsidised operations. Right, we'll put the vent motor on, and let's taxi out. Off we go. Captain Crash has the chapter and verse on the rules for using Saba there. So yeah, it's fairly marginal, even for a Twin Otter, it's fairly marginal. But what works in its favour is there's nothing really at the far end. So you don't really need to climb, you just need to get the wheels off the ground. Delray, thanks very much for joining the stream. You have a good evening, and catch you again soon. Thanks very much. Right, we've done the mags and the props, so let's put the pumps back on. I set the flaps to take off. Put the landing lights on, pitot heat on, and we're good to go. We've done the flight control check. We're going to go up to 2,500 and we'll use the autopilot on this one. Yeah, it's good fun, Captain Crash, for sure. At least the aircraft carrier can make its own wind and point the wind in the right direction. And Saba, sometimes the wind isn't really in that direction. We've got the fuel pumps on, we've got the mags on, we've checked everything, levers are set correctly. Clear on the approach, and the switches are set. When we were doing instrument rating training in a Seneca, the checklist we used to have to do would take a good 10 to 12 minutes from the point of starting until you're ready to go. That is not a good way to run aircraft commercially. Here we go, take off. 2,700 RPM, manifold pressure's coming up. T's and P's good, airspeed's alive, cross-checked. 50, 55, 60, ease into the climb. And again, it's a long runway, there's no obstacle that I'm going to be able to outclimb, so I choose to let the aircraft accelerate. Above 70 knots and about 150 feet, take the flaps up, increase the pitch attitude to offset the loss of lift from the flaps. Trim it out. And just as we did with the trip to St. Bart's, we'll take a right hand turn here and we'll fly through this gap here. Above 500 feet. It's climbing well, it's accelerating, so I'll come back to 2,500 on the RPM. And I'll just lower the nose ever so slightly, so we're only doing 500 feet a minute now. Excellent. I find flying the Islander almost therapeutic in a way, because you can do, as I said, multiple flights, fairly straightforward, and the procedures are very simple on the aircraft. Right, let's put the autopilot on. So I'm going to try for a smooth engagement here. It's not always ideal the way this comes in. I'm going to put flight director first and then autopilot. That should usually get it smoothly in. I'll set 500 feet per minute, and I'll remember to select altitude at arm, otherwise it will not capture. So I've got arm up to 2500. Let me go to the next page here. I'll push the cursor. What is it? TNCS? That'll do, it's there. Direct. Make sure it's in GPS mode. It's auto slewed, so that's fine. And is that nav? That's nav. There we go. Excellent. Fuel pumps can go off. Left engine still in the green. Right engine still in the green. Vent blower goes off. And we've got long haul trip now. It's 11 minutes until we get to Saba. Get your landing rate predictions in the chat. You're actually looking to count how many times we bounce rather than a landing rate prediction as such. And how many times on the flight back from Saba am I going to moan about elevator pitch authority. But you'll see it as or you may see it as we get into the flare. It's very, very obvious. I just love the look of the Islander. It's got this utilitarian thing going on about it. There's not another aircraft I can think of that looks like the Islander. This is 1.2. One of the little changes I usually do, I haven't done it since I updated it, is you just open the ACF in a text editor, and there's a value there called exhaust rate. If you change exhaust rate from 1 to 0.1 or 0.2, this dirt effect will disappear. This is a default X-plane effect you can see from the engines, and it really, I think it's overdone to a certain extent, but that's the default effect. It's easy enough to turn it down in the ACF. Yep, exhaust dirtiness, that's the one. Minus 90. Brunley, it's not going to be minus 90. Let's have it as a G loading instead. There's 2,500 feet. It's on the autopilot. I'm just going to ease the manifold pressure back a little bit. Get it down to about 22, and then I'll nudge the RPM back. As the RPM comes back, you'll see the manifold increases ever so slightly. Everything else is set. And the oil temperatures are a little bit on the high side. What, 30 degrees outside? Yeah, that's probably what it is. We were talking as well, talking about the G1000 and the oddities of the laminar navigation stuff. The GNS 530 and the 430, they also have the same things. It's the same navigation code. But because with the Islander you don't necessarily have to do IFR procedures everywhere you go, it's not anywhere near as intrusive on this sort of aircraft as it is on an aircraft that you would use for a lot of IFR flying. That's the one slight hesitation I have with the Integra aircraft. Obviously you can use Reality XP with it, which makes it a lot better, but then you've got the older AIRAC data as well. Crank up the exhaust dirtiness to 20. I don't know. I like my aircraft to be well maintained. A trip to the shop would be needed. So obviously Saba is very similar to St. Bart's. It's just a simple straight-in visual approach. We're going to land on the easterly facing runway because that's the prevailing winds. So as we get a little bit closer, can we see it? Can we zoom in? There we go. There's the there's the cliffs and there's the runway here, and it's these cliffs here that will cause that ground effect thing to happen. So we're just going to fly towards the right hand side of the island and turn in. We're at 2,500 feet. I want to descend at 500 feet a minute, so when we've got about 5 minutes to go, i.e. a minute's time, we'll start the descent. The Shetland livery Jazz Jet Junkie, that would be nice to have. It's a nice looking aircraft. To be honest, there's not many bad looking colour schemes on the Islander. It suits pretty much everything because retro styles look good on it, colourful Caribbean styles look good on it. It looks nice. I haven't seen a bad looking livery on the Islander. Not like the PC6, the Turbo Porter. Goodness, that can look awful with the wrong paint on it. I mean, it can look awful with the right paint on it, so with the wrong paint on it, it's dreadful. Right, that'll do us for the autopilot. Let me just put the fuel pumps back on again for the descent. Vent motor comes on, autopilot's off. Let's go. Just ease the manifold pressure back and we'll start the descent. Yeah, the 3D on this is superb. It's really nice. They've done an excellent job with it, TorqueSim. An ugly duckling. What's that? The Islander or the Turbo Porter? Jono. Oh, turn the panel lights on. There you go, panel lights on. PC6 is maybe... I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like the way it looks. That's just me. I remember seeing the PC6 in Air America. Was it Air America, the PC6? This looks nicer than a PC6. What they're working on now, mostly their work at the moment seems to be on getting the SR22 and the SR20 out with the Avidyne Integra. That's the goal. I don't know what's coming after that. TorqueSim are another one of these developers where you really don't... It seems to me that you don't have to worry about the quality with TorqueSim. There's very few developers in the sim world that you can take quality as a given with them, and TorqueSim are one. I know that the Utsil really wants to develop the Trilander to complete the set, if you like, and I'd love to see the Trilander as well, simply because it is, I mean, I like the Islander, but the Trilander is super ugly. I mean, it's possibly on the ugly scale with the PC6, but I'd love to see it. There you go. So the payware scenery fixes the terrain around about the airport. If you don't have the payware scenery, the default mesh, it gives you like the Laminar Research patented water slide where the sea runs uphill to the airport. The one thing about that is it does blend out that ground effect thing. Enough throttles with 6. Oh, you want extra throttles, Pilgrimage. Taxi on one engine in the Trilander, but which one? Flying to Saba, it seems like you're very close to it. We are only 4 miles away, but you seem to be very close to it forever. You never... just takes forever to get there. It's like, have you ever walked down the strip in Las Vegas and you're trying to get from one hotel to the other? It's like, oh, it's just over there. It'll only take a few minutes. And 20 minutes later, you're still walking? Yeah, same thing. Right, we are in good shape. So there should be like a little rock in here that we're going to aim for, but I'll stay at 1,000 feet for now. We've got the fuel pumps on, the vent motors on, the props have got to go, fuel sufficient. One of the nice things about a piston aircraft is you don't really have to worry about differences in fuel burn at altitude. So, you know, in a jet, if you're down at low level for a long time, your fuel burn's going through the roof, but in a little piston it doesn't make any real difference. He's working on the Mooney, tracking me, so that's good. Mooney's a fun aircraft. Right, we'll take the first stage of flaps, because this airport sneaks up on you. The visual picture looks all wrong because it's not overly narrow, it's just short. And it's very short. We'd also have to consider where the wind's coming from, because you don't want to get into the lee of the hill. If the wind was having a southerly aspect, we'd have to make a curving approach onto the airport. It could get really interesting with a very strong southwesterly here, but I don't think that's typical in the Caribbean. Right, power's coming off, props are coming up. Final stage of flap. So it is short, but it's not super short for the Islander. As long as it's not wet, it'll be fine. It's more interesting getting airborne with nil wind. So I've got 3 levers up, 4 levers forward, fuel pumps, flaps, sufficient. So let's see how this goes. A bounce, a crash, running off the end, all of these things could happen. Of course, I'll try and go around if I really don't like it, but sometimes it just doesn't work out in X-Plane. There you go. It just ran out of pitch there. There we go. Down we go. Hold the brakes. Let's have a look at that on replay, see if we can see it. If I bring up the... where is it? It's up here. Control deflections. There we go. Right, watch this. Let me scroll back through it. It was a bit on the firm side, but happy to be on the ground, to be honest, without bending it. So, this is the elevator deflection here. And you'll see me pitch for the flare. Maybe do it in slow motion. And it's just really just to help you understand what's happening with your flight model. What you're seeing is a real effect. It really does happen, but it wouldn't happen the way this almost like happens as a switch. Watch the rotation, look at the control deflection there, and you see it stopped, so I had to put a lot of extra pitch to keep it going there. Okay, I'll play that back at the normal speed. So you see the rotation, and it just abruptly stops, and then you have to force it into that flare. So it was a bit firmer than perhaps it needed to be, but the other option is to over-pitch. You know, you get into that ground effect, you over-pitch, and it falls apart on you from that point. Let's use the turning circle at the end because it's a bit on the tight side here. I'll bring the flaps up, fuel pumps can go off, P2E can go off, landing lights, well it's daylight, don't need to worry about those. It's good looking scenery though. The only thing is I don't think they've put decals on their ortho, which would be nice to have. But it's a massive improvement on the default for Saba especially. It should use the experimental flight model, JetJazz, yeah, I think so. I think it switches it on by itself. Should we try and pot next to the Twin Otter? There's a video online of a Twin Otter landing here, and it must be a 25-30 knot day, and they managed to exit here without a backtrack, which is fairly spectacular. Good going. Is there going to be space on the apron to park? Is it big enough? It might be a bit on the tight side, you know. Let's just park by these trees here. It's not ideal, Chet Jazz, is it? It's the way the experimental stuff works. There's a little bit of confusion in the sim community with it as well, and there's something I read about the... It might be the Beluga. Let me set the parking brake. Right, there's 1000 RPM. We'll check those mags before we shut down. 1, 2, 1, 2. Vent blower comes off. Avionics off. Throttle. Mixture. Fuel, fuel, fuel. Mags. Master. Open the door. Nearly there. One more flight to go, folks. Yeah, I don't really understand it. So this aircraft uses the experimental flight model, right? And if I go in here, go into General, that's selected on. I think I was doing some other testing with another aircraft that needs that switched on manually. But I don't think that when you're using an aircraft that switches it, that uses it automatically, I don't know if it changes the toggle value. It seems to be easily confused. There's a confusion in the community about how it works, and my understanding was that at this moment in time it's best to just leave it switched off, and any aircraft that needs it switched on will switch it on by itself. Otherwise, aircraft that don't control it can have it switched off, and that seemed to make perfect sense to me. Yeah, it doesn't check the box. I didn't think so, Pilsner. So the fact my box is checked is a function of me doing it myself. But if you read some of the documentation or some of the information about the Beluga, I think it is, it needs experimental flight model, but you have to switch it on manually every time. And I really don't understand that. It's not my understanding of how X-Plane works. But well, there we go. So Saba's fairly short. MD in the chat, flown into Saba for real or in the simulator? What's the biggest aircraft you've landed at Saba? I've only had it for 2 days, so the Islander is the biggest. But I'm going to try and take the TBM into, not into Saba, I'll take the TBM into St. Barth's. But I don't know, I mean easily a 172 into this, no problem at all. I don't know what else. How are we doing? That's an hour and a half. So by the time we get one flight back towards Juliana, that should be us. Yep, exactly, Airfighter. You switch it on in Plane Maker and then you don't have to worry about it. So if you load an aircraft after... I really don't think that would be the case, Pilsner, because it even says here that you know, you need to reload the aircraft when you change the option. So it makes sense that if you load an aircraft, it uses whichever value it's got. I mean, there's a possibility that if they were, you know, if it was crashing during testing, it could end up being left in the wrong position, perhaps. But beyond that, I really don't understand it. We start off with 45 gallons. We've got 35 gallons, so it's fairly frugal. That's one thing about the turbine aircraft is it uses a lot more fuel. So if you've got the turbine and you haven't spotted this, there's tip tanks fitted to it, and you get extra fuel gauges up here, and you get a little switch box here to control which fuel tank you're working with. Yeah, it's one of these things, Pilsner. It merits a little bit of testing, really, doesn't it? I'm all tested out at the moment, unfortunately. Right, let's switch on the cabin lights, the push notices and the beacon. We'll put on the start isolate. I'll remember the mixture this time. I'll set the throttle. Oh, excuse me. I'll set the throttle and the trim while we're here. And then we'll start number 2. So number 2 is clear. Pumps on, mags on, Start. 1000 RPM. Oil pressure's good. Second mag on, fuel pump off. Clear left side. Left pump. Mag. Clear. Start. 1000 RPM obviously, and the pressure's there. Remind me on the way back, we'll have a chat about the fuel pump and the carburetor as well, because that's fairly interesting. 10 amp draw from the battery, so let's switch one of the gens on. Comes up to 0, the voltage increases. Next gen on. Still good. 5 amps there. 5 amps there. And the battery not just charging. So gens on, vent motor on. Supply off, avionics on. And to do a quick flight control check while we're sitting here. All is good. And that's about it. We'll set the flaps, put the fuel pumps back on, and it's landing lights and the pitot heat as we line up on the runway. Very straightforward. It leaves the transponder set the setting you had it on last as well, which is fairly useful for these sort of short flights. Right, we'll go to 2,000 feet on the way back. Let's get out of here. You know what, the runway's right ahead of us, so we'll put the pitot and the landing lights on. Check all the switches. Dun 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 dun. Let's go. My detailed checklist is once again complete. Bottle Rocketeer, this is us at Saba. We're going to fly back to Princess Juliana, and that'll probably be it for this evening. A little bit of a shorter stream. As I said, it's been a fairly long week. I'm feeling a little bit of X-plane fatigue at the moment. On Sunday or Monday, can't remember. I watched a video. I watched one of the Lazy Game Reviews videos on an old 486 setup, simply because it was recommended, and you know, I like that sort of stuff. Anyway, the next morning I woke up and installed 86box on my computer and ended up with a 486 DX4 100 running running Flight Sim 4 and Flight Sim 5, just for fun really, and I was curious to see whether or not it was still enjoyable, because I must have thousands of hours in those sims. I remember the weekend when I first got Flight Sim 4, I was like 12 years old, and I just played that constantly, you know. It was one of these, oh mum, I'm not going to school on Monday, I feel sick, when I really just wanted to play Flight Sim. It still isn't, it's still enjoyable, but you do miss the comforts of X-Plane, the comforts of having proper flight dynamics, proper models. Right, just to double check, because this is a short runway, I've got the trim set, we've got the levers up and forwards, the carb heat's cold, switches are set, fuel pumps on. I'm going to hold it on the brakes. Full power, manifolds up, brakes off. T's and P's are still good. Airspeed's alive. Crush checked at 40. Get the nose off the ground now. And hopefully she'll just fly off. There we go. I'll hold it there. And notice how it pitches up as I climb over the cliffs. That's that tailplane coming out of ground effect again. I didn't make any increase on the... I didn't increase the back pressure on the stick at all. That is simply as the tailplane came out of that ground effect as we flew over the cliffs. It's really very pronounced. Anyway, no issues. I held it in for a little bit to demonstrate it, hence why you get the big pitch up there. You can adjust it, you just fly the aircraft, but it's good to see some of the things you should be looking out for when these updated sims release. So above 500 feet, flaps up, increase the pitch attitude ever so slightly. I'll bring the RPM back to 2500 for the passengers. Adjust the pitch, trim, and we'll climb at 500 feet a minute. Flight directors, autopilot, VS, arm. If you put the flight director button on momentarily before the autopilot button, it smooths the connection up, smooths the autopilot engagement a little bit. I'll put it into heading mode momentarily. Heading, and then let's just all there. TNCM, direct, enter. And what are we looking for? 3025. Very much so, Totrico. It's like going back to computing history, you know, the kind of computers I grew up with. I've not tried it with the G5 bottle rocketeer. It may do it with the G5. They did change it. It's got a yaw damper, which I never use, but the flight directors used, did it used to be labelled as INOP? I can't remember. But this instrument here, this wouldn't have a flight director. This is just a plain attitude indicator. This system here is part of the HSI is part of the Bendix King KCS 55, if I remember correctly. And part of that, this is a KFC 225 autopilot, and part of that whole system is a device called a KI256 attitude director indicator, and they all really work as part of the same system. So having the HSI without the attitude indicator, yeah, it probably happened in the real world for sure. You get all sorts of weird things, but it would be normal to have the KI256 matching this. It's like a square instrument with the same kind of irregular shaped sides. Fuel pumps off on the number 1 in the green band, off on the number 2, also in the green band, and vent blower can go off. Oh, is there no flight director on the G5? I thought there was. If I put it into nav, it'll actually take us where I want to go. There we go. Yeah, very, very straightforward aircraft. Dirk Link and Torfer, thanks very much for the follow, much appreciated. So, with regards to this fuel pump here, with a carburetor engine, just check we're going to level off. Yes, we are. RPM, sorry, bring the manifold back, I'll bring the RPM back, and I'll set about 2300. So with a carburetor engine, the electric pump, all it's doing is filling up the carburetor float chamber. The carburetor uses a reduction in pressure in the inlet throat of the carb itself, coupled with the atmospheric pressure in the float chamber to push fuel into the inlet track. The flow of air itself essentially sucks or pushes fuel into the system. All the pumps are doing, the electric pump and the engine-driven pump, all they are doing is providing fuel to that float chamber. And the float chamber is like the cistern on a toilet, that once your toilet is full, you don't have to go to the water authority and ask them to turn off the water pressure. Your toilet will shut off the valve when the toilet is full. It doesn't overflow. A carburetor float chamber is exactly the same. This is a very low pressure pump. And when the float chamber is full, the valve shuts off and there's no fuel flow. If you ever fly a general aviation piston single, you'll run the electric pump and you'll hear it build the pressure, and then it will stop pumping because the chamber's full. That's the only reason you run that fuel pump before start. Because if the aircraft's been sitting for a while, any fuel in the carb will have evaporated off and there's going to be nothing there. So you want there to be the chamber to be full of fuel, so that when the engine starts cranking, there's fuel presented to the engine. Unfortunately, the way it's done at the moment is more like a fuel injected system. When the pump's running and the mixture's forwards, it will push fuel into the engine and flood it, and that's not right. It's not right for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because there's a shut-off valve in the carburetor, and secondly, on aviation horizontally opposed engines, it's not like a car engine. If you've seen like a trying to think of a big American V8, an old American V8 with the Holly carb on the top. The carburetor's on the top, but on an aviation engine, the carburetor's on the bottom. So if you overprime a carb engine, or there's a leak in the carb and the fuel's leaking out, it doesn't go into the inlet, it doesn't go into the engine, sorry, it drips out the bottom. It'll just pour out the bottom. The carburetor's down here. So over fueling in a carburetor engine when it's not running, it's only going to drain out the bottom. And it's a fire risk, it's not supposed to do that, but it won't flood the engine. The only way you flood the engine is by continually using the prime function. There's something called an accelerator pump in here that when you wiggle the throttle vigorously, it will actually mechanically pump fuel into the system. And if you're pumping too much fuel as you're cranking the engine, you can still flood it. But flooding is much more of a fuel injected thing than a carburetor thing. So the way Laminar have done this is a bit weird. I've reported it as a bug, but to be honest, I rather suspect it's been like that since the dawn of X-Plane time, so it's probably not going to get changed. But never say never. For any piston aircraft that has an electric pump and carburetors, the simple thing to do is to only run the pump for a very short period of time before you put the mags on and start the engine. It's as simple as that. Cool, so Princess Juliana is ahead of us. I'm going to take the autopilot out and we'll turn left and we'll just join on the base leg. And that'll be about an hour and 45 minutes, I think. Right, approaching the field, fuel pump's coming on. Vent motors on, autopilot's off, and we'll turn. What would you like to see in the stream next week, folks? What would you prefer to see? Something more general aviation related? Something more airline related? I've been tempted to break out the old X-Plane CRJ and then try and follow the tutorials provided for the Aerosoft CRJ and see how much is actually implemented on the X-Plane version versus the Aerosoft version. Really out of curiosity more than anything else. But I don't have good memories of the CRJ in X-Plane, to be quite honest. It's one of the few aircraft I kind of regret purchasing. There's not many. Texlat, where would you like to see VFR flying? Integra, obviously. Well, it is launch day on Friday. You never know. Maybe TBM. Yeah, it's been a while since we did some TBM flying.